Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. With self-care strategies from Chinese medicine, functional medicine, Ayurveda, neuroscience, and beyond. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a licensed acupuncturist and transformation catalyst, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Today, I have a colleague in the Chinese medicine field here with me to talk about hormone balance and Chinese medicine and the connections between the two and kind of what we can do to help. L.C. Damron is a wife, mom to two little boys, acupuncturist, and hormone expert. Over the last 12 years, she's helped hundreds of women overcome hormone balance, weight loss, pregnancy, and postpartum and menopausal symptoms. Like me, she is very attuned to the interconnectedness of all things and all conditions, and is just as we were chatting before the show, she and I share a philosophy of it's all connected. So hopefully by the end of this conversation, you will see how that is true. L.C. Damron, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me, and I can't wait to have this conversation.
I'd love for you to just help us get to know you and your clients and patients a little bit. People come to see you for hormone balancing. Tell me what kinds of problems you help them solve.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with all different types of women, all the way from like our teenage girls who are struggling with either acne or painful periods and things like that, all the way through menopausal women struggling with like metabolism stuff and hot flashes and vaginal dryness and kind of everything in between there. So I love to do painful periods, PMS, anxiety, insomnia, low energy. And I'm sure we'll get into this. I like to kind of talk about like the symptoms, but I love to talk about like the nervous system and truly just like the mind body connection and how that causes like so many of these symptoms that women have. And the reason that I like to do that is because I think that so many women struggle with like this laundry list of things, right? And we feel like tired and kind of burnt out and we can't sleep great and like maybe some weight gain and maybe our periods are a mess and we feel really snappy and irritable. And it just feels like I think a lot of women just feel like they're falling apart. I think that they're like, oh my God, like there's so much stuff wrong and I don't even know where to go. And maybe you've told like your primary care and they're like, if they're good with you, they'll chat with you and say, you do have a lot going on. You're a wife, you're a mother, you're a business owner, etc. And this is just kind of like what it is. And some people will say, I think you need to like reduce stress in your life. But I don't think there's like this larger conversation about just how interconnected, like you said, all of this stuff is. And also like actually how to reduce stress. We can't all just lay in bubble baths all day or go to islands where it's really peaceful. And so how do we like still do all of our things in our life and help our nervous system to calm down so that we can start to feel better?
Yeah, it's really a systemic problem. Like the issues that you just described in this hypothetical woman who's coming to see you or this actual human body, right? Is that it is really difficult to do it all, right? To keep up with our lives in this day and age when things move so fast and when the demands on our time are so great and we kind of know what we need to be doing, but it's hard to implement it. And yes, to like giving ourselves some compassion by contextualizing it within this sort of larger, recognizing that it's sort of the water that we're swimming in. And in order to really change how we feel, it really requires showing up differently in the world than maybe how we're used to in order to kind of like and yet that's kind of like all we've known because that's what's helped us get ahead and survive and do what we've done in our careers or with our families or whatever it is so far. And then there's a certain point where it stops working. In Chinese medicine, it's like that idea of we've been drawing on our reserves for too long and then things start to break, right? Things start to function in a less than optimal way. And whether that's showing up in terms of sleep or mood or period stuff or menopausal stuff or weight
Mhm.
gain, or that it just all of these things, or the coping mechanisms that people then use for the stress,
Yeah.
and that those things then all contribute to this spiral. I think it is really a hard nut to crack and a hard knot to untangle. So where do you like to start with people on this? Because I know like both of us are anti quick fix culture, right? And like that's sort of that's something that Chinese medicine is kind of,
Mhm.
it's part and parcel of how we see the body, is that it's all interconnected. And so you can't just like take a pill and make it all go away. And like
Right.
so where do you help someone who is kind of overwhelmed and dealing with stress as well as a myriad of symptoms like you mentioned?
So I start with people by first asking them their goals. I think that we can look at people and be like, oh, you need to fix this and this. And I always kind of start by looking at things as like a branch and a root. So a woman might come to me and say, I can't sleep at all and my PMS is horrible. Okay. And so I start to ask them, about their sleep. Are you having trouble falling asleep, staying asleep? Like, what's your bedtime routine look like? What's the stress level look like? Are you watching TV at night? Like, all of the things. And then the same kind of thing with PMS. Like, what symptoms are you experiencing? When are you experiencing them? How severe are they, etc. And then I start to ask so many other questions like acupuncturists do. And, are you having allergies? Are you having digestive issues? Are you having energy issues? Are you having anxiety? Like, kind of just go through the whole body. And then from there, I like to, because I've gone through this myself, and before I kind of understood so much, like this has been about a 12-year journey for me. I mean, I felt better for many of those. So I don't want you to think like it takes 12 years, but of just constantly understanding how my body works and how I'm responding and etc. But I always want to help people like with their first complaints, like feel better. So like, is there some herbs, some quick lifestyle things that we can do to like get you some better energy or get you sleeping better fast? And like we know that there's a lot of great herbs and things to do to help facilitate that. But then we do have to start looking at, okay, so you're not sleeping well. You started not sleeping well 6 months ago. Why? Like, what has happened in 6 months? Have you gone through trauma before that? Were you really stressed out? How are you perceiving the world? Are you a perfectionist? Like, work life balance, relationships, your family life, your schedule. I go through all of those things with people because I think it definitely paints the picture for me of kind of the lens that they're viewing their life through. So then over the course of like weeks and months, we start to like really unpack like, okay, I think that you're not sleeping great because your nervous system is unable to calm completely down at night, and it feels very hypervigilant. It won't let you sleep in a deep way because it thinks that you may need to be alert at some point in the night because you're not letting it kind of come down. And so I think like I never want people to suffer. And like I said, there are some, I hate to use this word, but air quote, quick fixes of like, how can we get you some sleep? Because I also do think that sleep is a really important part of the cycle. And I think it's easier to do the work when you're a little bit more well rested.
Oh, absolutely. Sleep is so magical, and in that it can be game changing on so many of these issues that you mentioned. And I think
Totally.
there really is something, for listeners of this podcast, you're probably familiar with the idea that we treat the root and the branch in Chinese medicine, where the branch is the symptom and the root is the underlying pattern that's giving rise to the symptom. And that same root could be giving rise to other symptoms that you might not think are even connected, but that we would see as connected. And so part of Allie's take on panning out, right? So first understanding her client's goal, but then looking at the background that they might not consider relevant. That is something that we do as Chinese medicine practitioners and as coaches that can help us understand kind of that fit it into a pattern so that we can go after the root as well. But yes, to the fact that if we can get someone feeling better sooner rather than later, it inspires trust and confidence to stick it out
Yeah.
long enough to do the hard work that is often required in
Yeah.
changing our daily habits, changing our diet, changing our relationship with our nervous systems. And I think that stuff is a process, but certainly a process that's much easier to do when we're well rested.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think all of that stuff is true too. I think that getting people a few wins and just improving their quality of life a bit, like you mentioned before we signed on, like Xiaoyo-san, like that's a really nice formula to kind of just help with anxiety or PMS or stress in general that we can incorporate very quickly to just help get things like get the ball kind of rolling. And I've gone through a lot of like sort of like the mental health stuff and the nervous system regulation and understanding myself and like a super deep level and unpacking kind of like my perfectionism and people pleasing and type A and all of that stuff. And that takes like a lot of time. It just really does. It takes a lot of willingness and a lot of discomfort and just time. So,
Yeah.
it's sort of like just a whole process in one, I think.
I'd love for you to, if you don't mind sharing a little bit more of your personal story, and because
Yeah.
all of those things I think are, the people pleasing, type A, perfectionism, these are things that certainly we've talked about on a healthy curiosity many times because I have a
Yeah.
lot of this stuff too, or have graduated
Yeah.
from some of it to varying degrees. But I think of it as like almost like a school progression, like that kind
Yeah.
of you graduate from different levels of it, and then the world looks different. But it's not necessarily something that we can break up with overnight. But I'd love to know kind of like what were maybe the most pivotal things that have helped you really
Yeah.
change how you show up in the world?
So I started my journey actually, ironically, in acupuncture school. I had been training for marathons. I had gone through a really big trauma with losing my dad maybe like 5 years before that was like just 100% unprocessed. It was really shocking. I probably was still potentially in some shock, to be honest. Even 5 years later, it kind of like ebbed and flowed. And I had moved away from my support system. I was training for marathons. I had lost a lot of weight, was very immersed in the diet culture. I started acupuncture school, in which I had this mindset of, I want to do this perfectly. And the interesting thing about acupuncture school for me was more in college, some of it feels just like your undergrad, it just feels kind of like some of this knowledge is like unrelatable. Like you're never going to use this again. It doesn't matter. But like everything that you do in Chinese medicine school, you can use.
Yeah.
And so it's like in your best interest to like get as much and soak as much up as you can because it's all applicable for the most part. And so I just, I didn't apply myself in like honestly being transparent the best way in college. And so I just had like this almost like this redemption attitude of like, I'm going to do this perfectly. And I did. I really, really tried super hard, but it was like to my own detriment. And I was waking up, I was a personal trainer at the time and waking up and training clients at 5 a.m. And then my school was actually like right next to the personal training studio, but it was 45 minutes away from home. And so I would stay out that way from like 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. and just painting the picture, just a lot of stress going on. I was getting engaged and getting married in this time, thinking about buying a home in a different state, getting pregnant. I was just like in that stage of life that I was in. And so I started to feel really burnt out. I was just really, really exhausted a lot. And so I was chugging like Red Bull because that's what I knew at that point. And then I started having like low back pain. And it like started really slow. And then one day I was training at the gym and I bent over and picked up like a 5 pound weight or something, and my back like just seized, has spasms. It was a mess. And I was anxious. I was definitely in the like air quote adrenal fatigue situation too. And so this back pain though lasted for me for 5 years. And it was chronic. I had to stop running. It was really, really miserable. I was really scared about it, really anxious. I tried acupuncture, chiropractic, injections, physical therapy, massage therapy, like all the things under the sun. And they helped. They would like get me a few steps forward, but it was never like forever. It was never like long lasting. And I always had professors in acupuncture school that were like, you need to like give up control. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I kind of knew after 5 years of back pain that like there was some stress related illness, like part to it. Like I would, go on vacation and feel fine and then come back and it would just like snooze again.
I can't believe you're saying this. Like I could literally tell almost the same story,
Really?
complete with what you just said of like the back pain that was like unremitting and excruciating, except I was a massage therapist, not a personal trainer. And that, yeah, like going
Wow.
away for the weekend, it would go away. As soon as I would enter my front door, it was back. And it was like, okay, yeah, there's something else here apart from probably a very physical thing that, but
Right.
anyway, go on.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting.
Yeah.
Like this went on, I had graduated acupuncture school, had a baby in this time, like 5 years, long time. So eventually I was like frying at my kitchen table this one night. And in the meantime, I had like dealt with some hormonal stuff, like my hormones, and this time looked like I was in menopause because I was so burnt out, and I had worked with a naturopath to like fix those, and I was able to get pregnant. I had done some adaptogens for adrenal fatigue. So I had healed some stuff, but this back pain was unrelenting, and I still hadn't like dealt with the trauma and like the perfectionism in that, which having a baby like definitely perpetuated that perfectionism. And so I was one day sitting at my table like crying to my husband about this back pain and is it ever going to go away and whatever. And he googled stress and back pain, and this book came up called Healing Back Pain by Dr. John Sarno. And it was me, like every single page was myself. It was the epitome of my personality. It was the epitome of the description of the pain and all the things. And so I read that book and then ended up finding a therapist actually that specialized in what's called TMS, or tension myoneural syndrome, or now some people call it psychophysiologic disorders. And it was just me, and it like I was able to look at it from like a physical perspective, because he's an MD that wrote this, he's an orthopedic surgeon, to like a therapy perspective, but also from a Chinese medicine perspective of like the heart and the kidneys and the yin and all of these things that I was like missing. And I it all truly did just come full circle to me of like all these hormone issues, all this trauma, all the pain, all the symptoms. And it started a really hard, but like truly beautiful journey for me of figuring out where it came from. And it started obviously with like the big things of unpacking like my dad's death, but then it, is still ongoing, and looking at like my perfectionism of like how I was viewing the world and needing to be like this perfect business owner and perfect practitioner and perfect mother and perfect wife and perfect friend. And I was a people pleaser and had no boundaries and would let people like walk all over me and meet them at my office whenever they wanted to come get acupuncture or, whatever. And it was just like all of that stuff is kind of like a trauma response. And we learn these things when we're children to kind of like be okay and safe in the world. But it's obviously it wasn't serving me, and it's not serving any of us to do it as adults, because we have way more power as adults and can change. And so it's really like evolved into understanding like the mind body connection in like a really great way, and understanding how like when your nervous system is heightened because you're in fight or flight all the time because of your perfectionism, that's going to steal from your progesterone, and it's going to steal from your yin, and it's going to start to create hot flashes, or it's going to start to create PMS symptoms, or it's going to start to impact your thyroid. And so it's been like a really amazing journey at being able to put together like all the therapy I did with the Chinese medicine that I learned with like Western medicine and like the pathophysiology of hormonal imbalances and things like that. And it's been just absolutely amazing.
It's so much work,
Yeah.
right? It's like the willingness to look at the traumas that you've gone through in life and the stories that you adopt, as we all do. We all have our survival strategies adopted in life, that and being willing to be with that and to recognize, right, I don't actually need to keep putting my chi and blood into this story about what is
Yeah.
going to keep me safe, because
Yeah.
my life isn't actually about staying safe. Right?
Mhm.
It's like that actually all of that energy isn't necessary if you
Mhm.
have boundaries and a healthy routine in life, and are taking the steps to take care of yourself in those ways. But it's really hard. Like, so I really applaud you for being willing to do all of that. And
Yeah.
I also just want to mention for people who are listening, like the Chinese medicine bit of this conversation, the kidneys rule the lower back, right? And the lower body in general, also the reproductive system, and are kind of the foundation of all yin and yang in the body. So therefore, like adrenals, kind of this well that we dip into. So it's sort of that, and also has to do with the emotion of fear, right? Which is kind of what we're in, where we're kind of in this constant fight, flight, freeze, fawn,
Yeah.
protective mode. And so getting down, like, just so yeah, like taking more out of our bank accounts than we can put back on a daily basis is clearly unsustainable. Things are going to go wrong, and our energy can't be flowing smoothly in the body. We think about the liver as being governing the free and easy flow of chi in the body, and that's responsible for transitions, like the transition from waking to sleeping and sleeping to waking, and the transitions of our monthly menstrual cycles, the transitions of just being able to go with the flow and adapt to changes in life. And that, kind of like the tree, we want to be able to sway and bend with the wind. And when that wood element, the liver gallbladder, is not supported, if it's in excess, like stagnant or deficient, that can be brittle, can be like a tree that just breaks in the wind and can't adapt, and is just makes us feel tight and constrained, and causes pain, right? Can cause physical pain in the body, because when chi
Yeah.
stops moving, blood stops moving. So there's a lot of kind of like Chinese medicine parallels that we can see,
Mhm.
and also just to for people who are thinking, oh well, that's like, if you're thinking to yourself, I don't have trauma, it may be true that, like, you haven't been to war or had some, like, horrific thing
Yeah.
happened in your past, but as we're learning more about what impacts the nervous systems, it can be kind of small t trauma, as Gabor
Mhm.
Mate describes it in, like, The Myth of Normal, and, like, other trauma other people who are teaching about healing trauma, is that, like, unmet needs, right? Unmet needs in
Yeah.
infancy, like that, where, like, maybe we had a health concern, or maybe we were like, that we didn't get the love and attention that we needed for whatever reason. And so our minds make up stories about what we need to do in order to stay safe after that. So it's sort of like, it's the rare person who doesn't have some trauma to overcome and some work to do there.
Everybody does.
Yeah.
And it's
So
not about like your like looking back, like I had parents that really cared and tried to make my childhood as wonderful as possible. But I definitely, even, before the death of my dad, like I definitely had trauma with just like little, like you said, like little T stuff. Like I was known as like the good kid. And my people pleasing was like what kept the house in a harmonious place with
yeah,
my sibling, and just little things like that. And so you learn that, like, okay, if I can just go with, well, not like go with the flow, but like please people and just kind of like let my own needs go to make this person basically be quiet, that's how things will be safe. Because for me, like fighting in the household and arguing and stuff just was not safe. And so
yeah.
I learned to just be quiet, let my sister have her way, and that was fine. And so, I've carried that forward with people pleasing, and like anytime like conflict and stuff, like I don't love conflict still, and it's something that's been part of my own journey. But all of those things, a need for control, all of those things are trauma responses. There's actually a woman on Instagram. Her name is Nicole Sachs, LCSW. She's wonderful and kind of talks about like the TMS stuff I was talking about, but she posts like new little graphics every day that talk about like trauma response, like feeling like you need to keep your own problems to yourself as a trauma response, or over explaining is a trauma response. And you may not have had anything like catastrophic that you're like, yes, that was like massive trauma, but you probably have some patterns that maybe aren't serving you, and maybe are kind of like making your nervous system a little bit more elevated than it needs to be.
Yeah, and really, like, whatever it is that we adopt that's sort of like not truly who we are, but they're habits, they're patterns that we adopt in order to get by in life, that then we as adults don't really need, and we can kind of put down. That breaking that pattern can be really difficult in and of itself. And I'm curious, kind of like, even just going through that process, when I think at the core of what we do in Chinese medicine is we help people reconnect to themselves. We help people, have their consciousness recognize their essence and recognize kind of what's important. I'm curious, like, for you, kind of like, what helps you stay the course, like, it when it might have been easier to do something else? or like to just kind of like
Yeah,
let let the old patterns play out? Like why bother doing the hard new thing?
yeah, no, that's a really good question. So to be really frank, like my journey started from a place of necessity. Like I learned like with that back pain thing, I mean, I could either deal with things and like I said, I read myself on every page of that book from like I had some past traumas, I had the personality profile of like somebody who would go through this. I had the pain characteristics, and so I was so desperate to get rid of that pain that I started. And my thought when I hired the therapist to go through that with me was like, I'm going to do this for 12 weeks to get rid of this back pain. And I actually like ended up staying with him on and off for like 7 years. And it was through the birth of both of my children's, through
Yeah.
transitions in my business, through transitions with like aging parents and things like that. And I am such a huge fan of therapy because it just helps to like have somebody, a sounding board for you basically, and like be able to kind of help you. And so that was, mine came out of complete necessity of knowing this is the way out of this pain. And then after the pain came the anxiety. So that back pain was kind of like an anchor for anxiety. And, you know, kind of going back to Chinese medicine, we know that like the adrenals, the fear, the back pain, and anxiety all are basically the same thing. And so then I went through a bout with like severe anxiety. And so then I just kind of kept going with therapy and starting to realize like why we feel anxious and how we feel anxious, and that anxiety is actually part of our protective mechanism. It's not something to like fight and hate. And so yeah, I feel like I probably wouldn't have done the work if it wasn't from like a necessity of being so physically uncomfortable with both the back pain and anxiety.
Yeah, those are really motivating. Very, very motivating
Totally. I
things.
was like, I want to get rid of this. I got to deal with this stuff. And the
Yeah.
thing is, that's interesting. Like, even when I was kind of like going through these things, I actually did seek out therapy, like in my college years for the trauma that I had gone through. And it just like didn't resonate with me at all. I did always want to process it. I had no tools. I was young. And the therapist I had gone to, like we were doing, I now know what we were doing. They thought that maybe I was like depersonalized or, like in shock, and they were having me do like things to keep me really present, but I needed to like talk to somebody and them give me feedback. And so I actually like canned that idea for, I don't know, probably like 7, 8 years after that, because I was like, I don't think therapy is like working for me. So another lesson along the way, if you feel like therapy is not working for you, just find a different therapist.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that there is so many different ways in. And especially when we think about like just like there's body-centered therapies. Like there's ways
Mhm.
of I mean that meeting your nervous system where it's at. Like for me
Yeah.
for me in my journey, movement in the morning is so important for anxiety
Mhm.
maintenance. It's like if I can get if my mind is racing and I can get my body to kind of like be where my mind is, the two can link up. And then like kind
Mhm.
of and it doesn't matter like if I'm actually doing yoga, but that's what happens is the mind and body yoke in that way for me
Mhm.
by just through movement and in Chinese medicine, of course, movement when we are breathing, right? We're helping, especially when we're breathing through our nose, we're giving the message to the nervous system that there is no emergency, as opposed to when we're
Mhm.
panting and then we're kind of
Yeah.
depleting ourselves. But exercising, breathing helps to regulate, it helps to have the lungs exert their power over the liver and helps us to be able to allow qi to flow better. I'm wondering with just kind of tying this back into like hormone balance, right? When people think about well, like, actually, before we go there, with anxiety, do you have a personal favorite practice that helps you to regulate your nervous system, or a particular herb friend, or a particular acupoint, or like
Yeah.
anything that's useful in your life?
Yeah, I have a lot of different things. So I think the most eye-opening thing to me was actually like how we relate to anxiety. So I think just culturally, whether it's meditation or herbs or SSRIs, the goal is to get rid of anxiety. And so I think, you know, even my goal of going to therapy, like the intention was like, I need to get rid of this anxiety. And it took me a long time to actually get to a place because it feels so uncomfortable and no one wants to be anxious. And I understand that. But I think to understand why it exists was monumental for me, and understanding, okay, brain is detecting something that's dangerous and scary, so it's producing adrenaline, and that's this feeling that you're feeling right now, or like in Chinese medicine we call it running piglet chi. And so understanding of kind of like, or being able to like visualize, I think, okay, this is what's happening. This feeling that I'm having is just anxiety. And honestly, like almost going and visualizing it like a rainstorm. And like you don't go outside and like try to lift the rain up and like make it go away, because there's no way. And just sort of like letting it almost like travel the curve. Because you can't force a nervous system to calm down. You can certainly like give it messages of safety, of like movement and breathing and self-talk and all of those things that help it get through that curve faster. But the more that you're like, oh my God, I'm anxious, what do I do? How do I calm down? I can't calm down. Breathe, meditate, like all of those things, you're just sort of giving your brain the message that like this is wrong and there is something to make go away, when it's
Right.
just
It's not only is it anxious because it detects danger, but you're doing it
right.
wrong and there's more you need to be doing.
Exactly. And then you get in the pattern of being anxious of anxiety.
Yeah.
And so, like, for me, breaking that cycle was really, really huge. So, something that I tell all my patients that are anxious is like, okay, when you're anxious, like, let's take a deep breath and just call it out for what it is. This is just anxiety, and those thoughts of like, what's wrong with you? What do you do? How is this going to go away? All of that. Those are just catastrophic thoughts. And to just kind of like recenter a bit and just let it be there. Don't fight it, because if you fight it, you're telling your brain that it's a big problem to solve. There's a lot going on, which will then stimulate the nervous system more. So I really like that.
Hmm.
I also really like, in terms of like herbs and supplements and stuff, I think Shaosan is a great one. I also really like to take GABA
Yeah.
and tell people to take like an L-theanine GABA sort of tincture. I think that that is also really, really helpful.
I think, yeah, isn't GABA, especially when there is kind of a physical restlessness, can't relax feeling in the
Mhm.
body as opposed to just mental.
Yeah,
But
like that
yeah,
actual like fight or flight response.
yeah.
Like it's kind of like an antidote to adrenaline.
Mhm.
And so it kind of can like, I don't know, I visualize it kind of just like giving your nervous system a hug and being like,
Yeah.
we're good. You're okay.
Yeah,
Just take the edge off a bit.
it's interesting, like, just how doing the same things, but with a different attitude can be really different too. Like, that
Totally.
for me, like, when I've dealt with anxiety, like, I tend not to come at it from a place of, like, this is a problem that needs to be solved, but
Yeah.
after studying a lot of self-compassion work, Kristen
Yeah.
Neff in her work especially, that
Mhm.
the idea of like giving myself comforting touch, giving myself breathing, giving myself that, like, just recognizing, okay, yeah, this is a tough moment, and being able to be there for myself like I would have, like, yeah, we're going to ride out this storm together, as opposed to yeah, it's the similar thing of like, this isn't a problem to be solved. This isn't something I'm going to eradicate, but it is something that I'm going to help myself through. And a way to do that is I can give myself a long, slow, deep breath. I can do that again and show up for myself in a way that can be
Mhm.
soothing to the nervous system, as opposed to perpetuating that cycle. And I really appreciate that that implicit in what you're saying is that your body's not wrong, right? And helping people trust themselves in recognizing, like, yeah, that anxiety is there for a reason. And so being
Mhm.
able to look at it and see what kind of, like, what the gift in it might be. And
Mhm.
sometimes, like, it's, kind of, there isn't necessarily a story about it, but
Mhm.
it's that the nervous system is just in such a compressed state, and being able to look at kind of like, just what are we buying into that is keeping the nervous system it kind of in that state. And
Yeah.
also, what are some of the physiological things that could be contributing? Like, have you eaten today? Have you, like, are you hydrated? Are there actual alarm bells going off in your body that have
Yeah.
nothing to do with a deadline or whatever you think is going on that needs attention?
No, 100%. Yeah. Like blood sugar. Did you eat protein? Too much caffeine, coffee? Are you not sleeping enough? Like those definitely exacerbate. Even to this day, I stick to pretty much either like half calf or decaf, because I
Same.
was starting the day just amped. And I always think it's interesting. So it kind of like you said, like your intention and stuff. So people that specifically like practice intermittent fasting, like we know that that is a lot of like adrenaline that's kind of keeping the system going. And people will be like, I feel so amazing doing that. Like I am clear headed. I have all this energy. I'm drinking my coffee and just feel so productive. And other people like myself are like, I want to like crawl out of my skin. Like I feel like I'm going to die doing that. And it's like just the brain's perception of like, is that excitement and great, or is that like anxiety?
Yeah,
And for me, it's like
different bodies.
anxiety.
Right?
Yeah, totally. And I think the same thing with caffeine. Like for me, that stimulant feeling is like emulating just pure panic in my
Oh
body.
yeah. Well, I think that's pretty common. Like that's sort of the nature of the herb, right? And a
Yeah,
nervous system that's already revved, if we add revved to revved, it can be kind of a
totally,
recipe for extreme discomfort or making that worse.
totally.
This episode is brought to you by a brand new offering at brodywelch.com, helping the health pros coaching and consulting. It's no coincidence that a high percentage of my coaching clients over the years have been other medical providers and coaches. As healthcare providers, we are especially at risk for burnout. We got into our field because we want to help people, and so it's easy to put other people's needs before our own. I see too many acupuncturists, health coaches, doctors, healers of all stripes struggling to take care of themselves, their families, and their businesses, and feeling like there isn't enough of them to go around. It's easy to feel guilty for things like raising your rates, enforcing a cancellation policy, or saying no to people. Maybe you're struggling to communicate the value of what you do so that your ideal clients say yes to working with you because you don't want to come off as salesy. Or maybe you're exhausted from over-delivering because deep down you're wondering if you're doing enough. You can't do your best work if you or your business is struggling to get by, and you shouldn't have to choose between your personal health and the health of your business. In the 23 years I've spent in private practices, I've invested tens of thousands in business coaching, created and marketed online classes and communities, led retreats and live workshops, hired staff, experimented, and learned from many mistakes along the way. I would love to help you leverage what you know, overcome imposter syndrome, prevent burnout, and create a practice that feels rewarding and in alignment with who you are. I don't have a one-size-fits-all program or product to sell you, but I've likely been where you are and have plenty of experience coaching givers like you. I'd love to help you create the mindset, systems, and structures in your daily routines and in your practice that feel sustainable and aligned with you. Or just be a second pair of eyes on your website copy or your email nurture sequence to attract the right patients. To learn more and sign up to work with me, visit the coaching page at brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH, and check out Helping the Health Professionals Coaching and Consulting, because both you and your business deserve to thrive. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other issues. Like, okay, so everyone's like, yeah, okay, I get it. Stress. I need to deal with my trauma. I need to try to see if I can slow down. Hopefully, these are things that
Mhm.
are coming through in indirect ways from this conversation. But what about, let's talk a little bit about blood sugar and why
Yeah.
that is so foundational to so many things, or like why we can't talk about, for example, energy, hormone health, acne, PMS without talking about blood sugar.
Absolutely. This is a funny conversation because maybe like 7 years ago, I had a colleague that was like all about blood sugar in her practice. And I was like, what difference does that make? Like, I had no idea. And then I like opened up this whole can of worms and got really into like a lot of education on hormones and things like that. And I now know. But so when I talk about hormones, I generally like to talk about it in terms of like a pyramid. And on the very bottom of that pyramid, which pretty much sums up this conversation, is going to be cortisol, adrenaline, and insulin. And so we've kind of chatted about cortisol and adrenaline a little bit in the stress response and fight or flight. But the other one is insulin. And by the way, they're all sort of like a chicken and the egg. Like they all kind of impact each other as well. If blood sugar is dysregulated, it can be a stressor on the body as well. But just speaking about insulin, so insulin, when we eat, it kind of goes into your bloodstream and mops up that extra blood sugar that's in there and then stores it in your liver and muscles as glycogen. And then once that storage is full, it can store it as body fat, which has an endless amount of storage for a future famine. And it also can impact the sex hormones in like a big way. So, like you said, it can contribute to dysregulated blood sugar, can contribute to acne, it can contribute to an excess of testosterone or androgens being produced, which can contribute to like PCOS type of symptoms. It can contribute to feeling like hunger, energy, cravings, mood, and sleep are not in a great place. It can contribute to stubborn weight loss or weight gain. It can contribute to PMS, like you said, or like estrogen issues where you're having really heavy, crampy, clotty periods. Really, like kind of the whole gamut. It can contribute to it. Just changes the way I call it like hormonal soup. Because they all these like hundreds of hormones just kind of go together and they need to be in a good balanced place. And if insulin's out of whack or high, it can definitely change that hormonal soup in not such a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what a great summary you just gave us. That's awesome. It sounds like, I mean, it sounds like this is going to be, because it has its tendrils in so many different aspects of hormonal health, and it's pretty important. It's part of that foundation, that the bottom of the pyramid.
Mhm.
What do you generally recommend as first steps in terms of getting blood sugar under control for people?
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a few. So I think one of the number one things to do is to eat for your energy balance. So both under eating and overeating is going to contribute to blood sugar dysregulation. So just making sure that and there's going to be a range there, right? It's not going to be just like one number, contrary to kind of like what the diet industry says to us, but just making sure that you're not like rapidly losing, rapidly gaining weight, I think is a big thing for blood sugar balance. I also think that I kind of give the framework of like protein, fat, and fiber. So eating about 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal, about 8 to 10 grams of fiber, and then a little bit like 1 to 2 tablespoons of healthy fat is a really nice way to kind of help balance the blood sugar out, because they all do their individual things. So protein helps kind of like buffer that blood sugar response, and fiber helps slow down the digestive response. So if you think about fiber, it's kind of like a capsule on your food. So if you eat like a Skittle, right, your body just gets free reign to that sugar. Just like immediately there's no protein or fiber there to buffer that. But like an apple or something with fiber on it, your body has to kind of like chip away at that fiber, and slowly that glucose gets into your bloodstream. So it's not such like a big hit all at once. And then healthy fat is just great for keeping us full and satisfied from our food. So I think that's another one. And then I think sleep, our blood sugar sort of resets when we sleep. I think strength training, muscle, especially like big muscle groups, can help increase insulin sensitivity. I think that walking and like increasing just physical activity, so we call it NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, can be really helpful as well. I've read actually a lot of research just recently on just steps, and there's been a few different research studies that have come out, but around 10,000 steps, I think the range was like 8 to 12, can be really helpful at decreasing your risk of Alzheimer's, which is also a lot of people are kind of calling that now like type
Type
3
3.
diabetes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just kind of like metabolic disorders. So yeah, I think those are kind of like the big ones. And then lastly, I think something that people don't talk about with blood sugar is minerals, actually. So minerals are really, really helpful at keeping, I mean, everything, they do everything, but for blood sugar, making sure magnesium is in a good status, and potassium and chromium.
I really appreciate you bringing that up. Actually, all of those things I think are super important points that I just want to touch on a little bit, but just we'll go in reverse order, I think. So minerals,
Mhm.
how much magnesium, potassium, and chromium, and is this something to get in a
Yeah.
food source or in a supplement do you typically do?
So for magnesium, I mean, like leafy greens, dark chocolate, those are good sources of magnesium. I think due to our current level of stress, magnesium gets depleted from stress. So I
Yep.
think a lot of people struggle to get adequate amounts of magnesium. I think that if you want to check your magnesium status, you can get either like a hair tissue mineral analysis test, or you can get on blood work just a magnesium red blood cell count. So you want to add the RBC in there, to make sure that you're getting the status inside the cell, because most of our magnesium is inside the cell. But I think I generally recommend most people like try to supplement a little bit with it. And that can be in the form of like an Epsom salt bath a couple times a week, once a week even. It can look like magnesium lotion or spray, or obviously it can look like powders or capsules too.
Okay. And chromium, I know, it can be really helpful in blood sugar regulation, and potassium. Is that something that can often go together?
Yeah, so actually, like an adrenal cocktail is about 2 ounces of orange juice, 4 ounces or so of coconut water, and about a fourth a teaspoon of sea salt. And that actually has all of those things in there.
Oh,
So
what a great recipe. I love that.
yeah, so
Right.
it's great for just like the stress response. I started doing it maybe like a year ago, a little over. And I do feel I was a little skeptical of like, okay, what is this going to do? But I actually do feel like it makes me feel like less foggy. I do it while I work out in the morning, like first thing, and I just feel a little less foggy. I feel like a little bit more energetic. And I've had a lot of patients do it and they really like it too. But that does contain potassium and chromium too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Non-activity exercise therapy, is that what you said? Yeah,
Thermogenesis. Yeah.
thermogenesis. Okay, yeah. This is a handwriting issue. So basically that's just not exercise, but movement throughout your day?
Doing the dishes, doing the
Yeah.
laundry, walking
Mhm.
around your house, going on a walk, going in and out of stores. I think that's actually like one of the biggest issues other than like just stress and stuff that we face actually. And I think the pandemic of like curbside pickup and all of delivery and all of that has really impacted people. Like I think that it's caused like the pandemic weight gain. I think that was a huge issue for that. And I think
Yes.
also just hormonally, blood sugar, circulation, lymphatic system, like walking and moving just truly does everything for you. It really, really is beneficial. And if we just kind of live our daily life and, work at a desk all day, I work at a desk all day, like I probably would only get 3,000 steps a day if I didn't really try.
Yeah, and that's like really that what we need our muscles to utilize our
Mhm.
food, right? To utilize the sugar that we're giving ourselves, which is why
Mhm.
it's a great idea to eat during the day instead of at night, because then our muscles
Mhm.
get a chance to utilize that glucose and it's not just floating around free.
Mhm.
When you mentioned sleep, I couldn't help but think about like just that and the glycogen being stored in the liver and all that, that people who wake up during that 1 to 3 a.m. time, that often is an indicator of blood sugar instability, like, or that's liver time in Chinese medicine. So it makes us
Yeah.
think like, okay, is the liver having a tough time? Like, is the person either drinking alcohol or eating too late at night, or are they having, is the liver able to break down blood sugar, or is someone just waking up and they're anxious between that time, which is of course kind of less the physical liver but more the Chinese medicine liver of
Yeah.
just being able to process life, and help us move through it smoothly. So I just wanted to add in that sleep, especially if like it can be chicken and egg, where like we need
It
good sleep,
is.
because when we don't get enough sleep, our hunger and satiety levels get all thrown off, and we're like prone to eat, what is it, like 30% more than we ordinarily would, and we also are not getting the message that to stop eating. And so because our bodies think, well, there must be a good reason that we're not sleeping, and so they want to, our bodies try to be wise, but it ends up
Yeah.
kind of backfiring. So when people kind of are in that cycle of blood sugar instability, it can be, yeah, I think that it can be really helpful to use Chinese herbs in that case.
Mhm.
Things like songju and baiju together, that formulas like just that transform dampness if that's the issue.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
we have certainly herbs that can help regulate blood sugar, that are high in berberine. We have other herbs that can help reduce like kind of the quote unquote bad bacteria or the candida and things like that that make us crave sugar, and that, yeah, Chinese herbal medicine can be phenomenal for
Mhm.
helping to stabilize blood sugar. And I really appreciated that you brought up the protein, fat, fiber, because that's certainly where I like to start with people as well. And because so many people, like, I'm guessing you're probably Gen X like I am, and that, like we grew up with the messages of that fat is evil and bad, and it really is actually pretty essential. Or if anyone's counting calories, it's like, well, yeah, fat is more calorie dense, but it also is a good shut off switch of like you've had enough and you are satisfied. And so
Mhm.
what are your favorite sources of good fat to recommend?
I would say so like I like well fatty fish. I like grass-fed red meat. I like avocado, nuts and seeds, nut butters, chia seeds, flaxseed. Trying to think what else. Olive oil, coconut oil. Yeah, I would
Basically all of the ones except for the rancid refined ones.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Those are pretty much what
Yeah,
I
yeah,
consume. Yeah.
fantastic. Great.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay. So that's the bottom of the pyramid. Is there more to talk about in terms of like what the next tier up is?
Yeah, so the next tier up would be like pregnenolone or DHEA, and those are like our precursor hormones. So those with pregnenolone and DHEA, your cortisol can either, if you're in a state of stress, kind of decide, okay, we're in a state of stress, we need pregnenolone and DHEA to go this direction instead of to our sex hormones, because pregnenolone also produces some of the other hormones like progesterone and estrogen too. So if you're noticing a lot of women under stress notice low progesterone symptoms, which is a lot more PMS, spotting, insomnia before their period, feeling just really depleted, feeling anxious or irritable. And so, yeah, that's a lot of signs of low progesterone, but usually low progesterone is due to stress.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I'm glad that you mentioned that. We could totally talk all day about this stuff, but I feel like we've given people a good sense of where to start in healing their hormones in the sense of really helping the nervous system to relax and let go and managing our blood sugar. I'm curious if there's anything else that we haven't talked about that you feel like is really important for people to incorporate like when they if they are struggling with kind of this hormone imbalance issue mix that we've alluded to.
Mhm.
What do you hope
Mhm.
people either or what do you think it's important for people to think about in addition to these
Mhm.
things that maybe is missing from the conversation?
Yeah, so I think we touched on a lot of really great things in my own practice. I kind of think about what I call like the five pillars to hormone health. And so, which we talked about a lot of these, but the first one is more like the stress response, mindset, nervous system, and how people are kind of like perceiving their life. And if they're getting downtime, all of the things that we talked about first. The second one, it would be nutrition. If are you getting in a bunch of micronutrients, balancing your macronutrients, like we kind of chatted with the protein, fat, and fiber. Third would be sleep, which I wanted to kind of add this. I know that sometimes when people talk about sleep, it becomes almost like this source of anxiety for people because a lot of people will say, like, well, you can only be healthy if you sleep. And if you're not losing weight or your blood sugar's imbalanced or you're stressed and you're not sleeping, like you're making it worse. But in fact, like you said, those things are actually causing that too. And so I think that sometimes there can almost be like this panic with sleep. So if that's you,
Yes.
and you're not able to sleep, like that's okay. Take the pressure off of the sleep part of things right now and just do what you can in terms of like lifestyle and setting your circadian rhythm up for good sleep. But work on fixing like your adrenals, your stress response, your blood sugar first, and that should fall into place because that also sleep is like a branch symptom sometimes, like we were talking about earlier. And it also was like a foundational thing to do. So it's kind of, you have to be careful, I think, with
Oh
sleep
yeah.
and how you're talking about it with people.
I really couldn't agree more as I have struggled with sleep for
Me too.
myself and it's the kind of thing that like as much as I was trying to go after it head on and like trying all these different ways of sedating my nervous system, it
Mhm.
really only changed like it really was one of the last things to change. I had to change a lot of other things first in order for sleep to fall into place. And
Mhm.
now thankfully I won't say it's easy, but it's so much easier than it was and I'm incredibly grateful for that. But yeah, beating yourself up over having something going on in your body is never helpful, right? And so just being able to like and yes, it's not about blaming ourselves or shaming ourselves when we're struggling with something that being able to I will reiterate meeting that with compassion is feels so much
Yeah,
better than beating ourselves up.
totally. Like I tell my patients with sleep, if they're struggling with it, to like actually write out, I may or may not sleep well tonight, either is okay. and like just
Yeah,
make
right.
it
I'm doing the
work.
best I can to
Yeah,
support, it's like it's not like we can make sleep happen. We can
no,
create a situation where it's invited and encouraged, but
exactly.
and certainly if we don't make space for it, it's not going to happen. So that
Mhm.
idea of yes to sleep hygiene and all that. Yeah, great point. I love that you added that in.
And then the fourth pillar would be like movement and exercise. And then the last one would be like supplements, vitamins, and herbs to help support what we're working on. So one of my biggest messages, I think, is like that is sort of like a well rounded way to look at it, in my opinion. And also that it doesn't have to be so like high intervention and so hard and so confusing. And I know why it is, and that could be a whole topic for another day. I get it, but I just really like that's like the message of my whole business and practice is that it like doesn't have to be this hard, I promise.
Well, it's way easier with support, and I think that's I think that's why both of us do what we do is because it really is that it comes down to a lot of these very simple things that once we get them dialed in, it's foundational for a healthy life. And at the same time, getting from overwhelm to healthy life, it's like they're just taking small steps along the way gets you there. And it really helps to have somebody in your corner who's walked the path before, who knows how to get you there, and who has seen what works with other clients and other patients. Because it really is, there's so much culturally that is toxic and that is going to engender stress and imbalance, that it's like it takes some doing to stay the course and to be committed to your health, and it's way easier when you have help.
Totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
I had lots of help on my journey and couldn't have done it without my support systems either.
I'm gratified by the fact that I feel like these conversations, it's become more normal to talk about, like, to criticize hustle culture and urgency culture and things like that, whereas it really wasn't. I think even just, yeah, like, when I started this podcast in 2016, I feel like no one was talking about that, and
I know.
it feels like just culturally there has been a shift, so
Mhm.
that's something that we're all a part of, right? When that each of us has that power to be a culture changer and to be an example to other people in your life when you
Yeah.
decide to do things differently and to take steps towards your health. It's like you really there's a ripple effect that benefits the people in your life, that, like, first of all, just you have more capacity to show up for the people in your world, and your family and your work and all that, but it's also, it has this broader cultural effect that I think needs to happen if it's going to be kind of more sustainable for everyone.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I love that there has been a bit of a culture shift. I think we still have a ways to go, but there are a lot of us out there just really talking about it and offering kind of like a different way. And I think it's also amazing because you and I are both like successful business owners. And trying to kind of like practice what we preach. So I used
Yeah.
to think that if I changed, like I wouldn't be successful anymore and I wouldn't be productive anymore. But that's the furthest thing from the truth.
Yeah, and I b I bet it was risky to try that out, right? To
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah. It was a slow process. I think it
Mhm,
was just like kind of like dipping your toe in and kind of realizing like if you took a day off, like it would be
mhm,
okay. If
yeah.
you didn't launch a program when you said you were going to, it's going to be okay. Just kind of like starting to learn what the compassion, like how that intersects with being productive, I think has been huge.
Awesome. Well, Allie, it's been a really fun conversation, and if people would like to get in touch with you and learn more, they should head over to alliedamron.com, which we'll have in the show notes. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yep. You
Okay.
can find all my resources there. I have podcasts and YouTube and Facebook groups and free resources everywhere. So, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for sharing this time with me and having this conversation with all of us. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening today. To check out the show notes, get on my email list, or drop me a line, head to brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. I'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or feel inspired to try something different in your life, I'd love for you to pay it forward by sharing this episode with a friend who you think could also benefit and give them a reason to listen. You'll be helping to create a world where we encourage each other to embody self-respect. Till next time, be good to yourself.